Well, welcome, folks, to this edition of the 700 Club. I want you to know right here what happened in the Ukraine. I think it's important. For some reason or other, the whole narrative has gone off the rails. But here's the deal. Beau Biden, who was the son of the Vice President of the United States, made a deal in Ukraine. He was an official and an investor in a company that got a concession on gas, natural gas in the Ukraine. And his father, while vice president, actually was pressuring the Ukrainian government to deal favorably to his son, or at least that's so the narrative goes. And this whole business about Trump being impeached is just absurd. So what the president was trying to do was to find out from the Ukrainians, did Beau Biden break some law, and was his father, as vice president, trying to pressure you? That's what he had to find out, and he had a perfect right to do that because they were going to get a huge amount of government money, and if they were corrupt, he didn't want to send it to them. Just that simple. But do you think the Democrats are going to buy that? No, they're screaming impeachment. Yeah, the heat is on. Democrats are demanding release of the so-called whistleblower. And the so-called whistleblower never heard any conversations on the telephone, and he was, in a sense, making this whole narrative up. You have so much fiction going on in Washington, it makes you sick. And this is one example of that fiction. Well, what more do the Democrats want? Well, they want the president to give them the transcript of his discussion with a foreign leader, which would put him on a slippery slope, which no president should do, because when he talks to a foreign leader, it needs to be in confidence. Well, here's Caitlin Burke with the latest on the controversy over Trump's telephone call to the Ukrainian president.
Democrats may be building momentum toward impeachment over allegations President Trump withheld aid to pressure Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden and his son. Speaker Nancy Pelosi is meeting with the caucus today to discuss their next steps. Pelosi is demanding that the administration release the whistleblower report and the private phone conversation between President Trump and the president of Ukraine. But Trump's response has been clear. He did nothing wrong.
It's just a Democrat witch hunt. Here we go again. They failed with Russia. They failed with recession. They failed with everything. And now they're bringing this up.
In a new Washington Post report, it's disclosed that Trump ordered aides to freeze millions of dollars in aid to Ukraine days before he spoke with the country's president. The report cites an administration official who says the freeze was out of concerns of corruption in Ukraine, and Senate Republicans who said Trump was trying to determine if the new president was pro-West or pro-Russia. Democrats believe the president offered to release the aid only if Ukraine launched an investigation into Vice President Joe Biden and his son Hunter.
I put no pressure on them whatsoever. I could have. I think it would possibly have been okay if I did. But I didn't. I didn't put any pressure on them whatsoever.
There's a difference between, Donald Trump telling the Ukrainian president, hey, you might want to look at Joe Biden. It's another thing to say, you better look at Joe Biden, and if not, we got a few hundreds of millions of dollars in aid.
In an op-ed published in the Washington Post late Monday, 7 freshman Democrat lawmakers who served in the military and national security said that if the allegations against Trump are true, it's impeachable. These Democrats hold sway with House leadership because many of them are from Republican-held districts where Trump has been popular and have so far been against impeachment. Republicans say they don't have enough information yet and point to the allegations against Joe Biden's actions as vice president when his son worked with a Ukrainian company that was under scrutiny by a government prosecutor.
What's Hunter Biden doing on the board of directors of a major Ukraine natural gas company? And did his dad call off or ask to have the prosecutor called off in a way that would inure to the benefit of his company? I don't know. I think it just all looks bad, all of it.
Speaker Pelosi set a deadline for Thursday to receive the whistleblower report, promising new investigations if it's not handed over. Now there are reports that she's quietly discussing whether it's now time to proceed with impeachment. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
What does it say? You better be careful what you wish for, because you might get it. I mean, if the Democrats keep wishing, they might get a whole plate of unsavory information against their front runner. And by the way, I misspoke. It was Hunter Biden, not Bo. Bo is the man who died, and Hunter is the son who was under indictment in Ukraine. Well, in other news, Israeli President Reuven Rivlin is playing matchmaker. He's seeking to bring the two main political parties together, and it looks like that Netanyahu and Benny Gantz might be making a deal. John Jessup has more.
That is right, Pat. President Rivlin said Benjamin Netanyahu and Benny Gantz made significant strides toward a unity government. Rivlin brought the two leaders together to try and bridge the divide between Israel's two main parties. He wants a broad, stable government and to avoid a third election. Yet, potential roadblocks to a unity government appeared right after the Gantz-Netanyahu meeting. Netanyahu told his bloc of conservative and religious parties he wouldn't join a government without them, while Gantz's blue and white party said they will keep their promise not to serve with Netanyahu. Pat, back to you.
Well, the question is, if they have joint prime ministerships and they rotate between Netanyahu and Gantz, the question is who's going to be first. And Netanyahu needs to be first because that would keep him from being indicted. They're trying to indict him on charges that have been brought against him. And if he's prime minister, those charges won't stick. So I think that's one of the key things. And the other is the long-range destiny of Israel. It's supposed to be an Israeli state. It's supposed to be a Jewish state. It was a homeland for the Jews. It's not supposed to be a multicultural state like the United States is trying to become. It isn't open the borders to everybody who wants to come in. It's supposed to be a homeland for the Jews, period. And so the people who are Jewish want to keep it Jewish, and I commend them for that effort. But nevertheless, there is a movement in the United States particularly that says we don't like the idea of just being exclusive. We want to let the Arabs in and so forth. But if the whole concept of the Jewish state is watered down, it will considerably affect the destiny of that nation. So I think both Benny Gantz and Benjamin Netanyahu are holding to that, and I think American Jews should understand that's what's going to be done because it is very important to have a Jewish identity in a Jewish state. Well, the guy over there in England, he's kind of a, well, what is he? He's supposed to be a mini Trump. Anyhow, he pulled a fast one, and the court said, hey, Boris, you're not going to get away with it. John?
That's right, Pat. A major blow to British Prime Minister Boris Johnson. The country's Supreme Court unanimously ruled today that his decision to suspend Parliament in the weeks prior to the country's Brexit deadline was illegal. Supreme Court President Brenda Hale said Johnson's suspension was unlawful because it frustrated or prevented Parliament from carrying out its constitutional functions without reasonable justification. The Parliament will resume its session tomorrow. Johnson says he strongly disagrees with the court's decision, but he'll respect it, although he doesn't rule out suspending Parliament again. He could face a vote of no confidence in the House of Commons, which could trigger his resignation. Well, in Hong Kong, protests against the government there and China are in their 16th week. Officials had hoped the protests would die out long before now. And as George Thomas reports from Hong Kong, the longer the protests go on, the greater the chance that China will take action, especially with some upcoming crucial dates.
On Sunday, scores of anti-government protesters squared off with riot police at a mall, subway station, and on the streets of Hong Kong's northern town of Sha Tin, in what has become an all-too-familiar scene. For 16 straight weekends, demonstrators took their anger and frustration to the streets, setting barricades on fire and blocking roads. Police responded by charging the crowds, firing tear gas and beating protesters. At one point during the day, demonstrators ripped and trampled on a Chinese flag, provoking an angry response from China's state media, which called the act blasphemy. In one suburb, a more peaceful march brought dozens of people together, singing the U.S. national anthem and holding American flags as they walked the streets. Demonstrators have urged the Trump administration to save Hong Kong from China.
Hong Kong is the forefront of the battle against the totalitarian regime of China, and this is the forefront of the free world. Please support us. Please support us in our fight.
The protests erupted over a controversial extradition law, which would have allowed Hong Kong citizens to be extradited to mainland China. Critics argued those extradited could face human rights abuses. The bill has since been withdrawn, but the protests continue as Hong Kongers push for more freedoms and less control from China. Meanwhile, the former British colony is bracing for potentially more chaos ahead of next Tuesday's 70th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China.
While the Chinese government will hold massive celebrations, authorities here in Hong Kong are canceling various events, including a major fireworks display that will mark the national holiday on October 1st. George Thomas, CBN News, Hong Kong.
Thanks, George. Pat, it looks like the unrest there is far from dying out.
Well, you know, that extradition treaty was the thing that triggered it all, and they've taken that off the table. They said, we're not going to extradite you to China for trial. But, you know, this was a colony from Britain, and Britain, after many, many years, ceded control of it back to China, but with certain reservations. And the Hong Kong has been a safety valve for the people of the mainland. They use it for trading. It's a place where they can sell stock. The gems exchange in Hong Kong has been very vibrant. There's some huge billionaires like Li Ka-shing in China and the Kwok brothers and other people like that who've been very successful in Hong Kong. And they have extensive holdings in the mainland. And it's a nice outlet for China. And to shut that thing down would be tragic. And so the Chinese government is sort of between the rock and the hard place. They don't know quite what to do. But these protesters, I think, have gone over the edge, and they've got to slow it down. If they don't, they're going to bring repression, and it will be a bloody mess like Tiananmen Square. John?
Pat, President Trump will address the situation with Iran in a speech today at the United Nations. On Monday, he took a stand against religious persecution. He is the first U.S. president to host a UN meeting on religious freedom. In his keynote address, the president pointed out some alarming statistics, like 80% of the world's population live in countries where religious liberty is threatened, restricted, or even banned. When it comes to Christians, he said about 1 in 9 experience high levels of persecution worldwide. And it's estimated that 11 Christians die each day for their faith. That's one reason why he's taking action.
I mean, just think of this, 11 Christians a day for following the teachings of Christ. As president, protecting religious freedom is one of my highest priorities.
The president urged the United Nations to repeal laws that restrict religious freedom and to increase prosecution of crimes against people of faith. He also announced a $25 million increase in funds to protect religious sites and relics, and a business coalition, Pat, focused on protecting the rights of religious people in the workplace.
Well, I commend the president for what he's doing. He's the only president I think we've ever had who's just stood up boldly against dictators and against others because of human rights. We've heard talking about human rights, but he's the first one that's really doing something about it. And frankly, the United Nations is a joke. Like it or not, the General Assembly has had multiple initiatives against Israel. They have censured them, 31 times or something like that. It's terrible. Do they censor any of these other dictators? No. The Security Council has got China and Russia as its members, and they're not going to let anything happen. The only reason we were able to fight the Korean War, it seemed like that those guys were out of town at the time, and President Truman could push through an action to let us get in there and help the South Koreans. But those bureaucrats at the United Nations make an obscene amount of money, and they keep passing these resolutions in the General Assembly, which are contrary to American policy, contrary to the freedom of other nations, and contrary to religious freedom. Why should we keep paying the bill? We pay them maybe, what is it, a third of their budget? I think we ought to. I have suggested, and actually I spoke to the Council on Foreign Relations about this a long time ago, but I think we ought to have a community of democratic nations that supplants the United Nations. The UN was set up after World War II. It seemed like it was an American thing, and it seemed like a good thing. But as far as I can tell now, it's a sounding board for dictators. And you've got these tiny little nations that have the same vote as the United States in the General Assembly. It's the whole thing is absurd. And the sooner we can withdraw from it and get something in its place, the better off we'll be. John.
Pat, more trouble for Puerto Rico this week. Last night, a 6.0 earthquake shook the United States territory. 3 strong aftershocks rocked the island, but no severe damage reported. It comes as a major storm is set to bring high winds, rain, and waves later today. Tropical Depression Karen could bring floods and landslides. Schools and government offices are closed on Puerto Rico and surrounding islands. And Pat, Puerto Rico is still suffering from Hurricane Maria. Could definitely use a break.
They've suffered so much. This was a Category 6 earthquake, I understand. It's not a category, it's a level 6. It was a very strong earthquake. And now, if they get hit by another storm, I don't know if that island can sustain it. It's almost bankrupt right now, and those people are suffering terribly. So please pray for Puerto Rico, and we'll do what we can to help them.